Again, thank you for everyone joining today. And I would now like to turn this over to Stephen Saltstein, Force Wealth's CEO. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Callie. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us. Just a quick note on Force Family Office, just to tell you a little bit about us, for those of you who don't know who we are. We're the largest network of transaction-oriented or deal-seeking family offices in the US. And essentially what we do is we bring families together to share intellectual capital, best practices, meet best-in-class service providers. But ultimately what we do is we bring them together in the context of co-investing. And then we bring them fantastic investment opportunities. So we have an amazing panel for you today. It's essentially going to be a Psychedelics 101. I've been wanting to put on this Psychedelics panel for over a year. And then as luck would have it, a dear friend of mine, Rob Nathan, who is one of the founding members of PsyBio, approached me about 6 months ago, and he said, "Hey, I'm getting behind this really strong CEO. He's getting involved in the psychedelic space." And in the back of my mind, I always thought, and I'm going to ask Evan Levine, who's the CEO of PsyBio, are psychedelics the next cannabis? And I always, I thought to myself, well, had this been 7 or 8 years ago and someone said to me, would you want to get involved in the cannabis space? Looking back, hindsight 2020, I think that answer would be a resounding yes. And so I invested. And so Evan, I'm an investor in Evan's company, and he is, in the process of doing an IPO in Canada. So much has happened in regards to psychedelics in the last month. First of all, Timothy Leary turned 100. So he famously, gave the quote, "Turn on, tune in, drop out." And he pioneered the use of mushrooms for psychotherapy because he felt that talk therapy just didn't work, and he wanted a solution to help people. And then as luck would have it, and I didn't even know this was on the ballot, but both Oregon and Washington, D.C. Legalized psilocybin. And the history of psychedelics is very interesting. Originally, it was invented by a scientist named Hoffman, who didn't even know it had hallucinogenic effects until he accidentally ingested some, and this is in the 30s. And then there was this kind of East Coast, West Coast war, so to speak, and where essentially, Timothy Leary was always annoyed by Ken Kesey because Kesey, he felt, had really, turned this younger generation onto psychedelics. And what that did was that alerted the government authorities, and they never really had the opportunity to do, the real research that they wanted. Today, amongst other things, there is speculation, so to speak, that psychedelics can help people with obesity and depression. And there's a number of documented studies where they're helping people with cancer. They're terminally ill, and it helps them, accept the death process in a more calm manner. So there are a number of fantastic things that these drugs can do. And it's been over 50 years, really, since the government shut it down. And it's kind of a little bit sad to think that it's taken 50 years to get us, now to the beginning of the beginning. But nonetheless, here we are. And so we have two fantastic panelists for you. It's my pleasure to introduce you first to Evan Levine, Chief Executive Officer of PsyBio. PsyBio is a biotechnology company developing a portfolio of psychoactive compounds targeting the treatment of mental health challenges and other disorders. The company has a collaboration with Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, where they're developing a proprietary platform technology for biosynthetically producing psilocybin, its intermediaries, and psychedelically inspired molecules from genetically modified bacteria. The platform technology is expected to enable the rapid generation of highly stable compounds that are far cheaper, faster, and greener to produce than any other published methods. And we also are honored to have Dr. Adam Gazzaley, who is a dear friend of mine, for almost 30 years. Dr. Gazzaley is an MD, PhD. He's the David Dolby Distinguished Professor of Neurology, Physiology, and Psychiatry at UC San Francisco, and founder and executive director of Neuroscape, a translational neuroscience center engaged in technology creation and scientific research of novel brain assessment and optimization approaches. Dr. Gazzaley is also co-founder and chief science officer of Achille Interactive, a company developing therapeutic video games. Synsic, Adam, you'll correct me on that later, a company creating the first sensory immersion vessel, and Jazz Venture Partners, a venture capital firm investing in experimental technology to improve human performance. He's been a scientific advisor for over a dozen companies, including Apple, GE, Nielsen, and Deloitte. He has filed multiple patents, notably his invention of the first video game cleared by the FDA as a medical treatment, authored over 150 scientific articles, and delivered over 675 invited presentations around the world. He wrote and hosted the nationally televised PBS special, The Distracted Mind, with Dr. Adam Gazzaley, and co-authored the 2016 MIT Press book, The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. He's also the winner of the 2017 Prose Award. Dr. Gazzaley is the recipient of the 2015 Society for Neuroscience Science Educator Award. And actually, Adam, I realized that it doesn't mention the fact that you were published on the cover of Nature, which, you know, for a scientist is the equivalent of winning the Academy Award. So to say that you are distinguished is an understatement. Adam, are you there? Are you going to show your picture? There you go, buddy. Nice. It's great to see you. And I love your background.
Yeah.
So, why don't we start with you?
Sure.
Do me a favor. Tell everyone how you came to the concept of psychedelics research. What caused you to think that this would be helpful for society in the context of medical benefit, and what you're trying to accomplish with your new lab?
Sure. Well, first of all, Steve, thanks for having me here today. As you mentioned to everyone, we go back like 30 years, so it's fun to engage with you. And thanks for everyone joining in today. I know these are complicated times, and to take a little bit of space in your day is really well appreciated. So thank you. I would like to first say that, you know, my interest in psychedelics as a research tool was really based largely on my assessment of the tremendous need that we have right now. As we know, mental health conditions broadly defined, including depression, anxiety, dementia, on, are increasing around the world. I mean, as we see a lot of really positive benefits in things like cancer and cardiac disease treatment, infectious disease, despite our current predicament right now. And so there's an incredible need and there's incredible opportunity for new treatments. My work at UCSF has really focused on what I describe as experiential treatments. So unlike most neurologists, I'm trained as a neurologist, I did not seek pharmaceutical research solutions for the last 20 years. Instead, I've been building experiences as a way of improving brain function, driving this process that we call brain plasticity. And we've had some really exciting results using interactive technology like video games, which you heard about. We just recently had FDA approved for the treatment of ADHD. But while I became really excited about experiences as medicine, I read a really amazing book by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind. Anyone that's on this call, I imagine this is an interesting topic to you. I would suggest reading that book. It really did change my mind. I didn't know all that much about psychedelics. I knew what happened in the 60s, and I knew it was certainly very powerful. I knew it was controversial. I knew it had some data out there, but as a neuroscientist, even though I did an MD and a PhD, I never learned about psychedelics in any of my formal training at all. It was sort of just put on the side. And reading that book and understanding and was really eye-opening of how much data had been acquired back in the 60s, 10,000 participants showing benefits across a wide range of conditions, including depression, PTSD, end-of-life treatment, addiction. And what I realized then was that, yes, it's a molecule that you take through natural forms like mushrooms, psilocybin, or synthesized like LSD. But what really leads to the dramatic outcomes and the positive benefits is the experience that occurs. In other words, you can take the exact same substance in a really bad context, like you're at a music festival and someone harasses you while you're on these, and you will get PTSD from that, right? That's like the dark side. You could take the exact same substance in a nurturing setting with a therapist that's guiding you, and it could cure your PTSD. And so that was really sort of the shift in perspective for me to realize that the molecule is the initiator of the therapeutic event, but the experience is what guides the outcome. And since I've already been creating experiences through video games and other digital technologies, I was thinking, wow, if we could learn more about how to create the ultimate experience during a treatment, we can make even more positive outcomes. And so that's a very high level view of when I realized there was an opportunity for me and my research center, Neuroscape, in this space to do something really unique. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, that's amazing. Which psychotropics are you interested in developing initially, and why?
Well, we're unlike what you'll hear from Evan. We're not on the molecule development side. So what we would do is work with a group like Evan's or others out there that have compounds that have these really profound effects on the brain, understand them as best we can right now, and then say, how can we record what is happening in the person's brain during the treatment? Right now, it's a black box, but we have all these sophisticated physiological recording technologies that we believe we can plot in real time the stress someone's experiencing, where their attention is, their mood, and then guide them by changing what they see and what they hear. And so some of the compounds that we're most interested in are MDMA, which is also commonly known as ecstasy. There's a really exciting work going on right now, a phase 3 trial supported by the NIH of MDMA for PTSD treatment. And then there's also great interest in psilocybin, which is the active compound in magic mushrooms. And there's also really exciting phase 2, moving into phase 3 research showing the benefits of psilocybin for depression treatment. Those two are very interesting to us. There's others out there like DMT and other compounds. LSD is interesting to us, but we're going to baby step into it with MDMA and psilocybin.
Okay, great. Evan, please do us a favor. Tell us about PsyBio and what you're trying to accomplish. And also, maybe you can just touch a little bit on the question of, are psychedelics the next cannabis in regards to investment?
So much has just been said. I'm really excited to take part in this. So thank you very much, Steve. Adam, thanks so much for joining us today as well. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm really excited to be here. So many topics have been opened up. Why don't I start by saying that I did not grow up in the cannabis business, and a lot of the companies right now that are psychedelically inspired or operating in our industry did pivot from the cannabis business. My background is actually in capital markets and investment banking. So I started off back in the 90s, and I ran the convertible securities departments at two companies, Hambrecht & Quist and Dillon Reed. And there we were specializing in new issuances of derivative equities in biotechnology and technology companies. And then when Dillon Reed got purchased out by a Swiss bank, I joined a private equity firm called Brown Simpson Asset Management. And there we grew rather rapidly. So I was a managing partner, head portfolio manager, and we had dedicated $500 million to direct investments in public biotechnology and technology companies, structured investments, which we were value added investors. So I did that for a bunch of years, investing in these companies. And then when I sold my partnership out, I bought out an insolvent biotechnology company down in San Diego. And there we had done this. I'd done it with a few partners, and we done it because we were making bridge loans into the company for a couple of years, and management wasn't really progressing. So we came in, did a full reorg and recap on it. We took the company. It was trading at a very small valuation. It was on the OTC, recapped the company. I replaced most of the management team, and I put in a full new board of directors of venerable gentlemen that were CEOs and CFOs of public biotechnology companies to help guide me and restructure the company. So I was elected CEO, and we took it from a small market cap up off the OTC onto the American Stock Exchange, which is now NASDAQ, and we achieved a valuation of over $500 million. I'd raised $80 million for the company while I was CEO for 7 years, and we had multiple institutional analysts covering it. So I bring a full package to this. I bring the ability to understand capital markets, portfolio management, investors, but more importantly than the recap that I did at Ventrix, over those years, I got an extraordinary in-depth experience of working with the FDA and running clinical trials. So with my team there, I've run phase 1s, phase 2s, and pivotal phase 3s in North America, South America, and Europe in advanced lung cancer, metastatic colorectal cancer. So I have full ability to take this company, which I got the idea for, sort of like Adam did a couple of years ago. I saw psychedelic seeping into the vernacular. It was being talked about. Nobody really heard of this stuff about a year ago. And Steve, who alluded to a dear friend of both of ours, Rob Nathan, we started looking for transactions late spring last year to try to buy some technology in the psychedelic space. We didn't really see anything interesting for a long time. We saw set and setting deals. We saw hotels, retreats, ketamine clinics, nothing we felt that was investable from our perspective and our ability in the capital markets and the biotechnology industry to create a real world-class company. Up until last September, a young faculty member at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, Dr. Andrew Jones, he had accomplished a research first, and the university patented his research. He published it in the Journal of Metabolic Engineering, and the university announced it. My group, along with multiple other groups, caught the attention. But what Dr. Jones was able to do is he achieved a way to biosynthetically synthesize psilocybin from genetically modified bacteria at gram scale, and this was a research first. So of course, my team and I were very, very interested in the technology. We went in and long story short, through a very difficult time through COVID and the markets careening, we were able to come to terms with the university and support them. And we acquired the global exclusive rights to what is a platform technology that not only biosynthesizes psilocybin from a recombinant host, but we're also working in the intermediates in magic mushrooms and a whole group of other tryptamines, which I'll go into a little bit. But the magic mushroom has multiple analogs within it that actually act upon each other. And we filed intellectual property, like not just on psilocybin, but the intermediates, baocystin, norbaocystin, aragonacin, psilocin, norpsilocin. And we see therapeutic value in these, not just as a combination, but individually. So we're studying these right now. But the value that started this with psilocybin is that what Dr. Jones is able to do biosynthetically compared to any other published methods out there is make this far cheaper, far faster, and far greener than any other published methods or methodologies that we know. So we happen to have, after the COVID lockdowns weakened up, interest in psychedelic medicine really has started to have a major resurgence. So I'll interweave there what Steve asked about cannabis. I do not see this as cannabis. I did actually get involved in it thinking that from a capital markets perspective, that it would be an economic opportunity similar to cannabis. And then the more I got to really know the industry and have had personal experiences and a lot of anecdotal experiences with people I know who rely on these psychedelics to actually function, it really changed my mind. I think personally, cannabis to me is very similar to alcohol. It is recreational. It certainly has its utility. And I mean, it's still not even fully legal in the United States, but it's relatively a legal drug. My opinion on psychedelics is that these should not be anything like cannabis. They should not be like alcohol. They should not be sold out of a dispensary. They should absolutely be administered in a setting such as what Andrew was setting up with psychotherapy and a controlled situation where you can really capture the healing power of these drugs. They are extraordinarily powerful. As you alluded, Dr. Albert Hoffman, when he synthesized these back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, Sandoz, his employer, was actually selling them into the psychiatry market, but it did get shut down with the controlled substances. The way government works, irrelevant, because there's been a real resurgence in this research in the last 10, 15 years. And that's what brings us all here today. Let me quickly pivot. So we have this platform technology, not just psilocybin, but these other drugs as well, these other tryptamines within the mushroom. And we have the global rights to to exploit anything that comes off of this platform technology. So any other plant or fungus that elicits a molecule that could give you a hallucinogenic or entheogenic response, we have the rights to commercialize this off the intellectual property that we're partnership with Miami University. So we are in a transaction as well. I'll just mention 1 minute. We hired in Canada, we hired Air Birdless, a prominent Toronto firm. We hired MNP advisors to do our auditing work. We already had a kickoff call with Toronto Adventure Exchange, and we acquired a CPC, a Canadian pool company, about 3 weeks ago in Canada. So we're actually in the middle of a transaction. I'll save it to Q&A later, more specifics on that if anybody's interested, but I'd really rather go back to enjoying this lively conversation. But Adam, let me address something that you said as well regarding MDMA. I think MDMA is an extraordinary powerful drug. I'm not sure why it's legal. I don't know the history on it, but what I do know is that all of us, any of us who had experience with MDMA, we really have no idea what we took. If you buy these products off a street, you know, from your sister's ex-husband, you have no idea what you're ingesting. I know recently some bad MDMA went around with laced with fentanyl, and that's why it's an extraordinary powerful drug, and it should be sold through a prescription-based model. So this licensed platform technology is for a prescription market. We're not in a decriminalization movement. We're not betting on legalization. We believe that these drugs should be approved by the FDA or Health Canada or other regulatory body and administered under proper psychiatric care. Yeah. I'll pass it back to you, Steve.
Yeah, no worries. You know, Adam, I was listening to an interview from Timothy Leary, and one thing he said, Evan, to your point is, and I think he took mushrooms over 1,000 times. But the one thing he said was he never took anything that he didn't know the origin of. But, you know, from the 60s, there's this term, set and setting. And I was just, what does that mean? And how do you see that as a path forward in advancing this field? You're on mute. You have to unmute.
All right, there we go. No, it's a great question, and it's sort of what we've been talking about already, maybe between the lines. And so I'll just make it really explicit. It sort of underlies what Evan was saying of why he believes it should be prescription based and coupled with therapy as opposed to just distributed. It's really because of this idea of set and setting. And so what it means is it goes back to how I describe this as an experiential treatment, that the molecule itself doesn't determine the outcome. It's not A plus B equals C. It's a complicated interaction that involves more than the molecule in your brain. It involves the setting that you're in. So what Leary was talking about when he said set and setting was the idea that where you are as you go into the treatment is really important. And that set could be your predisposition to certain mental illness conditions. For example, if you have a predisposition to schizophrenia, that's a very high risk factor, not ideal for this. But even things not as sort of weighty as that, just what your intentions are, you know, whether you're trying to heal something or you're doing it recreationally, not good or bad, but it really influences the outcome. So the set is sort of your expectations, your predisposition for things, how you arrive at the treatment. Setting is everything that occurs during the treatment. Are you in a safe place? Are you listening to music? Are you seeing, you know, walking around in nature? Are your eyes closed, as they often are during treatments now? So setting is all of the surrounding context around you, and it influences your outcomes massively. And then what he didn't say is that what most people acknowledge now is that there's a third component, which is everything that happens after the treatment. So both immediately after the treatment, people will call that post-processing, sort of borrowing a term from, like, you know, the computer world and photography. And so right after you finish, how do you view what just occurred to you? And then the longer term process, people use a term called integration. How do you take all of those lessons and things that you saw and experienced and then bring them into your life to lead to like an enduring positive impact? So set and setting is now just bundled together as all of the context, the experiential aspects of the treatment that could make it good or bad or good or great. And that's really, really critical and very important to recognize that although everyone in the field, whether it's like a shaman from South America or a researcher at Johns Hopkins, everyone believes that this concept of set and setting, context and experience is critical for the outcomes. But what I found that was shocking was that there's almost no research, no empirical, like prospectively designed research. Almost everything we know about set and setting is like anecdotal. Not that it's bad, but it hasn't been documented in well-controlled randomized trials. It's just that, therapists that have been doing this for 30 years slowly figure it out through trial and error, and they're really good at it. The problem is that it's not really scalable, because the knowledge is not really being reproduced and replicated and shared through peer-reviewed literature. And so when people like Evan help bring into this world molecules that are very powerful and standardize them and distribute them and help the research, what I want to do is help us understand that set and setting, understand what is the ideal context. Now, there's not just going to be one context. It's going to depend on the person. So this idea is to take what we have from psychedelics now and turn it into personalized and precision treatments for all of these conditions. If that makes sense.
Are you saying that it's almost like the psychedelics are clay, okay, and then you need to the after effect, how you really perceive how you perceive the trip is how you mold that clay? Is that
I might say that your brain is like clay and the psychedelics are sort of making that clay moldable in a sense.
That the trip itself can be felt in different ways after you've had it, and then that's how you kind of leverage it going forward?
Yeah. So like one of the ways, like when I was talking to my chair of neurology and saying, hey, I want to bring psychedelics into our research center, I say it's sort of like doing a psychedelic, one of these compounds we've been talking about, is sort of like shuffling the deck, right? So you have all of these like very well plotted routes in your brain. Like you perceive stimuli in a certain way. Sometimes it's healthy and sometimes it's unhealthy. And the unhealthy ways lead to these iterative cycles like depression or OCD, where you're just trapped, or addiction, where you're trapped in these pathways that you just can't get out of. And what happens here, what we believe from research, is that these compounds, they all act slightly differently because they're all different. But in general, what seems to be happening is that they're sort of loosening up the system. And so those pathways are now possible to be reinvented and rewired, relaid down as this deck is shuffled. So yes, what you said is true. Picture your brain like clay, and now you just put like all of this compound on it that made it much more malleable. Now, not just how you interpret this treatment afterwards, but even what's occurring during it is all going to lead to what the outcome is, how that clay is shaped.
These questions are for the both of you, but what are your opinions of microdosing?
Me or
go for it, Evan?
Oh,
I've been rapping.
So let me just add on to a feeling on what Adam was saying, that these experiences are not limited to the duration on the actual molecule. These actually last for weeks to months, and not to admit anything on a public forum like this, but my personal experience is that this does emanate for some time afterwards, and this therapeutic benefit really does linger and offer more to your life. I mean, I've got some people in my life. I have a person that's near and dear to me that actually was about to end her life. And she took a combination large dose of mushrooms and LSD and never had another suicidal thought again, still uses them. And I have lots of these anecdotal experiences, but these compounds have been used. There's nothing new about this. And there's nothing new about what Albert Hofmann did, actually. I mean, he synthesized it out of plants and being ingested for thousands and thousands of years. There's evidence of on cave drawings that these have been used. They're alluded to in the Bible. And during the Renaissance, I mean, the art, the music, the science, the mathematics that have been developed by enhancing consciousness with these entheogens have been priceless, and they really. So you said about cannabis before. Cannabis, I think, is more like alcohol. You start, you start, you stop, you stop. It's an experience. It's pleasurable for a lot of people. These compounds actually could change the world if they were actually administered and delivered in the proper way through formal regulatory processes. But microdosing, I'm really not sure on microdosing. I know a lot of people who microdose, and I think the jury's out. There are studies going on it. But as far as microdosing, I feel, to me personally, it's sort of like CBD. That CBD, one company got a very potent form of CBD approved, and it seems to alleviate pediatric seizures. But CBD is sold everywhere by kilotons and kilotons, and there's an enormous demand for it. I've never felt that it does anything, but if you happen to believe that it's doing something, you'll spend $50 on a lotion to administer it to some pain. With microdosing, if you're believing that these small doses are giving you additional, brain power, therapeutic potential on a regular basis, I think that's a good thing. And I can tell you, it's without harm, in my opinion, completely without harm. These psychedelics are not, there's no LD50 that really, except if you, Adam, maybe you confirm, you're a scientist, you eat your weight in these things till you get to a lethal dose. They are not addictive, so there's no substance abuse issues, and they're on the exact opposite end as alcohol and morphine on the addiction and lethal schedule. So if microdosing is going to be a trend and people believe that they're getting benefit, I don't see any downside to it at all. And I'm hoping, I'm in the business of developing these compounds. I'm hoping that we do see some, efficacy in some robust statistical clinical trials that demonstrate that microdosing does have a therapeutic benefit. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I find it very interesting, but I'm a scientist. You make my strongest opinions based upon data, and as far as I could tell, there's not really any great data out there yet. I know that there's a lot of interest and work that's starting, so I think the jury's still out. Placebo effects are really strong, especially when it comes to the mind. I mean, placebo effects are even strong for cancer treatments, right? But when it comes to mood and depression and attention and anxiety, there are strong benefits of believing that what you're taking is going to be helpful. Not that that's not valuable. It's just a different mechanism of action than one directly caused by the compound. And so we just need more data. There's a lot of controversy in the field about it, because when you take a microdose, just so everyone's clear, since we didn't really define that, what we're talking about is taking a dose that you don't consciously feel. So in other words, like if you were blinded, you'd be like 50-50 on guessing whether or not you're taking it. You'd probably say, I'm not taking it. As opposed to what's done in all the clinical trials out there for at least for psilocybin and MDMA is like, you're taking it. It's not subtle, let's put it that way. And so a lot of people in the field would maintain, although again we need more data, that the therapeutic benefit of these compounds is really driven by the psychedelic effect, the reality distortion, the sensory and emotional heightening that occurs, even the hallucinations, that all of these that are part of the trip, whether it's done recreationally or therapeutically, people feel like that's part of where the benefit comes. While the microdose is the same compound, but it's such a low dose that none of those overt effects are very clear to you. And so it's an open-ended question. Could the benefits be achieved without those effects? Some people like those effects, some people don't like those effects. At the very least, they complicate the scenario. And if benefits could be achieved without them, there's no doubt a really potentially even larger market, because the lack of, the complexity, the side effects, all those could be heightened with higher doses, which is well known. And so we have to find out. One of the things that I personally hypothesized is that as you decrease the doses and have less of the sort of explosive trip effects that are really correlated with the dose, the benefit can be achieved, but you may need to create even more set and setting, even more context, because with the lower dose, you can still do guiding, but it's going to be more subtle. So that's why I'm very interested in multi-sensory experiences. One of my companies, SenSync, which you were trying to pronounce, Steve. SenSync stands for sensory synchronization. And what we created there is a sensory immersion vessel. So this is a device that you lay in. It looks like it's straight out of a science fiction movie. And you see, hear, smell, and feel nature experiences that really make your brain convinced that you're laying in a place like this, Bryce Canyon. And it's quite powerful, even if you're not on any psychedelic. But I'm very interested in how that type of environment might combine with a very low dose of psychedelic, whether it's the full microdose or some people call them mini doses, somewhere in between. These are just open-ended research questions.
Adam,
which does make me wonder, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, Steve. It does make me wonder in a comparative statistical study, how you don't possibly know you really just took niacin.
Yeah.
I mean, you can talk yourself into thinking that you're tripping, which really placebo does work, but you're not going to visions.
And that's why I said we need placebo-controlled randomized trials to understand, just like every other, study that has gone through the FDA over the last, 30, 40 years, that there is a methodology on how you figure out if it's the placebo effect or not. I mean, that's, a pretty standard experimental research design challenge. So yeah, I think that we could figure that out, and we have to.
Adam, you invented the glass brain. And, one thing I've heard about these drugs is that it actually changes the structure of your brain, or maybe adds the plasticity. Do you think that's true? I mean, do you think that's what we're going to find?
Undoubtedly. I mean, for you to have a major therapeutic effect essentially means that your brain has changed in some way. That's just how the brain works, right? That's what plasticity is. The brain is capable of changing itself at every level, from chemical to structural to physiological and functional, and it does so all the time. That's what learning is all about. So yes, that's how they work. The devil's in the details, of course, and how does it induce that change? How can you optimize and optimize benefits, minimize side effects? But yes, that's how it works. The glass brain, since you mentioned it, if anyone on this this call Google's glass brain, you'll see lots of pictures. All those pictures happen to be my brain, which is sort of surreal. I probably have the most visualized human brain in history now. But we created that technology. I was actually working with a friend of mine, Mickey Hart, who you may recognize.
Mickey Hart's?
Very, very well. Mickey Hart was the first glass brain. So Mickey Hart is the drummer from the Grateful Dead, good friend of mine, sort of like my uncle now. We've spoke together in front of White House and Congress and South by Southwest, talking about rhythm and the brain and the therapeutic effects of music, which is not actually separate from this conversation, because almost all psychedelic treatments are done while listening to music. It's actually very hard to separate those effects right now, because they're in every study. Music also has very strong effects on the brain, as probably most people realize. But I digress. Mickey Hart and I were talking about music and its benefits on dementia, and we had to do a big stage performance, our first of many. And I wanted to show the audience what actually the rhythms of the brain look like. So I built with my team at UCSF this technology called the glass brain, and in real time we had Mickey on stage. You could still find this online somewhere, where we showed his brain while we were interacting. We showed his brain while he was performing at South by Southwest and all sorts of things. But what the glass brain is the ability to see brain activity while it's evolving in real time, which is something we just have not had before. And so the glass brain is part of our psychedelics research initiative at UCSF, at Neuroscape, in that what we want to do is peer inside someone's brain while they're going through a treatment. It's never been done. As I said, it's usually a black box now. But if we could see what's happening, remember, people really can't communicate very well when they're taking these compounds, especially if the doses are high. They're just, inside. If you could look inside, put on like a VR headset and go into their brain with them, this is what I envision, then you could determine if they're struggling, if they're thriving, and guide them more successfully. So that's
Adam,
how the glass brain comes in.
What indications do you think these drugs, and I know you don't know yet, but you have certainly you can give us an educated guess. what maladies do you think that they could help with first? What do you think are the most likely? Is it obesity? Is it depression?
Well, the things that are most likely are out there. Everyone knows them already because if you're in this space, because those are the ones that are rapidly advancing to phase 3 and will probably have FDA approval first. I've been peeking at the question. Someone mentioned ketamine. Yes, ketamine falls into this category. It is approved in one format for depression treatment. The doses are sort of lower than what are normally psychedelic inducing. Ketamine can be also delivered in doses that definitely induce strong psychedelic effects. So it is part of this story. So depression already has ketamine. As I mentioned, depression and psilocybin from mushrooms is advancing towards phase 3, and PTSD for MDMA. So definitely depression, post-traumatic stress disorder are at the very top of the list because they're already going to be reaching FDA submissions for treatments very soon. But the other types of conditions that have shown evidence are other states where you're sort of caught in these loops, which is true of depression and PTSD, but also true of anorexia and obsessive compulsive disorder and addiction. I would put those right up there. They're going to be following. There's already great work on them as well. Another area that I find very, very exciting, and Michael Pollan talks about this in his article, Trip Treatment, and in his book, is end-of-life care.
Right.
So imagine the horrifying news of learning that you have 6 months to live. I mean, few people have the capacity to manage that very well. And it has destroyed families in that most special of times as you sort of wrap up your life rapidly. How do people deal with that? It's mind-boggling even to try to conceive of that. And we probably all know people who this has happened to. It just happened, sadly enough, to a friend of mine that just passed a couple of days ago. And, it's just part of life. But there is some really exciting research showing that these compounds, because they shuffle the deck, can allow you to reframe an experience, even one as devastating as that. Not that you're like, this is all great, but allow you to now interact with your family in a more nurturing, positive way and sort of ride out those last very valuable moments, really in a much more, a positive setting than otherwise. So I think that one's also really interesting.
And there have been multiple studies going on before any of us were ever talking about this years ago in Switzerland using specifically LSD for end-of-life experiences, and it had a dramatic positive impact on these patients, really being able to transition themselves into understanding, accepting, the reality.
Evan, if you're a family office and you're considering investing in this space, and I want to talk about your pipeline in a moment, but how do they get over the skepticism? I mean, there have been thousands upon thousands of clinical trials. There are thousands upon thousands of molecules that people are, kind of targeting to cure, every malady out there. How do you get them to take this seriously in the sense that there just seems to be a tremendous amount of attention around, let's say, 6 or 7 different drugs, and yet those are the drugs that have been set aside, that historically have been illegal, etc. I mean, how do they get over the fact that, like, maybe this just isn't an excuse? Don't be offended, guys, but this isn't just kind of a child's play in a sense, and we're all just we're revolting against our parents.
Yeah. So you've opened up a thorn on my side here, because I grew up in the biotechnology business, and you are absolutely skepticism. Investors that participate in the biotechnology business understand the risks, and the risks are extraordinary. And statistically, and sadly, unfortunately, most compounds never see commercialization. They all fail along the way. And being that I grew up mostly in oncology and understand this, sadly, more than a lot of people, it just statistically, it is easy to make them work. in rats. It's even worked in test tubes. Phase 1, even phase 2, slight efficacy. It's when you get into the robust studies where they're extraordinarily difficult to achieve efficacy. With this, I go to sleep every single night, not necessarily on my portfolio or my products, but I have no doubt, it's incontrovertible to me that psilocybin, at least, and some of these other compounds are going to be approved by the FDA and other regulatory bodies. They've received breakthrough status already on therapy. They're being shuffled quickly. There are hundreds of millions of dollars are going into it, and they work. We all know that everybody who's done this knows they work, and you could just see the early results in the clinic. They're not hidden. They keep moving up. These work. It is not like oncology where you're looking for a very, very small fraction of improvement on a new molecule and adding an exorbitant cost onto traditional, chemotherapy or immunotherapy. And it's gotten so large in oncology. I mean, now these therapies are 500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million a year, and nobody's going to support that. Especially if you have an elderly patient and they actually could afford to do that, they're much better off coaching them through the inevitable, which is going to happen no matter whether you get, CAR T therapy or gene therapy. You're better off with this type of therapy and just advancing them into that transition and making them more comfortable. You also asked about other indications. It's going to be tried in everything. And as I was listening to Adam, I was thinking what a lot of people aren't talking about out there, but I do believe that ketamine is being used for is chronic pain. Pain, for the most part, it emanates from the brain. It's not really in the organisms where you're feeling it. So I believe that rewiring the brain really could. And we talk about depression and substance abuse. I mean, chronic pain is another extraordinary problem in the Western world. So that's area, but I've seen it in everything now. Inflammation, neurodegenerative, ADHD, Alzheimer's, autism, they're looking at it, which is something near and dear to me. I really hope that you could have an impact on autism, childhood autism. But
can you talk about PsyBio and particularly your pipeline and where it is today and where you see it going?
Sure. So we made the first announcement basically being able to biosynthesize psilocybin. So our psilocybin is a method of production, just like Compass is using a method of production, just like extraction. It's no different than the psilocybin that you will take anywhere else once it is administered to the body. With that, we filed all this intellectual property on the intermediates as well, baocystin, aeroganacin, or psilocin. We are studying these in animals, and the literature out there does suggest they have not been heavily studied, but they do. These are tryptamines that occur naturally in these plants, and we believe they have therapeutic benefits. And on the last time I saw Paul Stamets speak, he actually was touting the benefits of baocystin, but nobody's developing it that I know right now. So we're working on that one as well. The rest of the pipeline, we are going to make an announcement next month. I shared with Adam, he got excited about the compound that we're working on. We have new intellectual property on it. So it's powerful hallucinogenic. It's not as well studied right now in the clinic, but we believe because of its properties, it will be. And we are working on the entourage effect, looking at these tryptamines in combination, but we're also working on non-natural compounds, just moving around, methyl groups, phosphate groups, and looking for improved psychedelically inspired medicines that don't occur naturally, in these plants today. So we will not put out any detailed information until we actually file intellectual property, but we are going public in about 8 or 12 weeks. So the team here is very, very cognizant and experienced in running public companies, and we know the appetite investors have for communication news flow, and we will be offering that information as it comes to fruition at the company.
Let me ask one last question, and then Callie, let's turn it over to the audience. But Adam, what do you think these drugs do to someone's perception of time?
The effects on perception are profound, and they cover pretty much the full gamut of how you perceive time, how you perceive sensory stimulation, how you perceive emotions. So yeah, it's some, and it depends on the compound. I'm generalizing; they're all different. For example, DMT, like 5-MeO DMT, has maybe the strongest effect on time, where you don't have any sense of time. It may be hours, it may be seconds, and it's usually actually very short. So yeah, it changes your perception of where you are. Your ego could dissolve completely. So yeah, you get the full, the full package of perceptual shifts.
Great. Hey, Callie, why don't you take over and let's hear and answer some of the audience's questions.
Sure. And for those of you out in the audience, if you do have questions, please type them in at the bottom of your screen under Q&A. Okay, so interested to understand why many of the companies in the space like PsyBio are going public through reverse mergers instead of raising venture capital, and how can an investor value a company like this?
Okay. Earlier in the year, in the spring, during the middle of the COVID crisis, where the markets were crashing and none of us were leaving our homes, I was invited to speak at the KCSA conference. It used to be purely cannabis. In the last 2 years, they converted it to adding psychedelic companies. I think there were 5 of us on the list in there. I believe MyMed was in there, and Ulysses, and I forgot the others, but there were hardly any out there. When I completed that conference, we got a lot of attention. I got a lot of phone calls coming in from bankers and investors in the Toronto area that were putting together these companies that I had already recognized a year before were going to start making their way into the capital markets. We had raised some capital during the most difficult times, and then as we moved through the summer into the early fall here, the industry for public companies became really exciting. So Compass went public. Compass is a traditional biotechnology company. They're way ahead of us in development right now, but we're developing very similar, strategy here. And they went public, and their valuation soared to $1.5 billion. What is Compass worth? It's worth whatever it's trading at this particular moment. PsyBio, we already know what this is worth because, as I earlier stated, we've already put all of our legal, accounting, and investment structure in place, and we are out there raising capital right now on a transaction. So we know we're valued at, and we've already started taking subscriptions on the book. So this was actually fortuitous. So we all set this up about a month and a half ago together, and I had just hired 8 Capital and Canaccord last week. We started our roadshow, so this just aligns. If anybody is interested in it, aligns perfectly with the investment opportunity. But we're valued as the market values us, just like every single other company, and we are a biotechnology company, and it's certainly not without risk. I mean, there are, of course, risks in drug development, in manufacturing, and new drug discovery, but we feel that we have true value. The team is experienced in doing this with other companies, and we're excited to take our shot in, the psychedelics business. So a lot of companies are going public, and the appetite is there, so we're being very opportunistic.
Okay, great. Thank you. For people that have been on antidepressants for decades, is there a reason that they would not let them into any of these clinical trials?
Adam?
Yes, Adam?
Yeah, a lot of the trials right now do exclude based upon some previous factors, but that's all going to keep evolving and changing. It would be ridiculous to not allow people that are being treated but are not being treated adequately to not participate. So this is still early, despite the fact that it's been 50 years, it's been stopped for a long time. In some ways, we're starting again. And so it's still early days, I would say. And what's happening now is like some very tightly controlled studies are occurring because they're going for gold, right? They're going for these FDA approvals. But what we're going to see, especially with some successes, and we already have breakthrough status for 2 indications, is that you'll see studies that are going to be broader and broader and allow more and more populations to be included. So if that is occurring, it's only temporary.
Okay.
And these antidepressants have horrific side effects. So when you go to, address your anxiety, address your depression, and you look at, what could happen, weight gain, sexual dysfunction, suicidal tendencies, you kind of wonder, how on earth that this was the only standard of care for the last 50 years.
I agree.
Thank you. What is the present state of addiction treatment with psychedelics? Has it advanced out of the research arena?
Well, it hasn't advanced into formal approval, if that's what it means outside of the research area. There's some really great studies. There's some awesome work out of Johns Hopkins Psychedelic Center that you could check out. I've seen some profound results reported for tobacco addiction, way beyond any other treatment I've ever seen before. And then there's work on alcohol. I'm not an expert in this, so I couldn't cite all these studies, but it's still in the research phase, but the work is really encouraging.
Thank you. Is there an understanding of the cellular effects of psychedelics, and are there different mechanisms with the different psychedelics?
Yeah, they all have different mechanisms. They're all different molecules. There's sort of the classics, serotonin-based psychedelics like we've been talking about, but MDMA acts on the glutamatergic system. So they have very different effects on different receptor systems. The cellular effects are being studied. They include things like plasticity itself, where it changes neurons, the structure of neurons. There's also some interesting work showing anti-inflammatory actions. And then the impact on the person takes place across multiple levels of resolution. So yes, there are cellular effects, but then there's also these large scale emergent network effects, which occur really rapidly and are probably not just entirely mediated by the cellular effects. So it's complicated. Changes occur across multiple levels, and this is a very, very active area of research all around the world. So now that we've sort of gotten our legs under us again and said, okay, it's ridiculous that scientific research should be stunted in such a potentially valuable field. Now, I mean, I have colleagues all over the world that are starting research studies, and some are very cellular, looking in the dish or in animal models, and others like myself and the work I'm doing at UCSF are in humans and really trying to fill in some of the larger scale information about how it works.
Okay.
Adam, are there other countries that are kind of really on the cutting edge of this? I mean, for instance, if you're a biotech, one of the places a lot of US biotechs are going to do clinical trials is Australia, because, they're giving so much support. But I'm just wondering, are there other countries that are way ahead of us on this, or?
Well, yes. The literature was emerging, from my perspective, even more strongly from the UK and Switzerland. So lots of great scientists I know there and talk to regularly from both those places. There's an incredible amount of interest in Australia. If it wasn't for COVID, I'd be in Australia, in Melbourne, giving a talk probably right now, right? It was right at the beginning of November, mid-November. And sad to miss that. Love visiting Australia. But yeah, so those places in particular, tons of great research. But US is catching up, especially on the clinical side. A lot of the work on the more basic sort of brain mechanism, Switzerland and UK, really amazing work.
Evan, do you see any benefit to legalization in Oregon and Washington, just from kind of a research perspective, or no, it's just all recreational?
I'm not sure it's recreational. I'm not exactly sure what Oregon did. As far as decriminalization, I believe that decriminalization is just halting any small possession drug charges in order to take the economic burden off the legal system. What Oregon just did, and I see the word legalization there, it wasn't just this. They legalized everything, including heroin. I personally don't think heroin should be legal. It could kill you in one shot. So I'll tell you that the positive that I'm seeing from it is more people are on our chat here, that more people are getting excited about the psychedelic community. So we have a license to develop this for the prescription market. So we're developing it to go for FDA approval. We don't believe this is going to be in your corner dispensary at any particular state and any time in my future.
Do you know which analysts out there have the best handle on this space?
I don't want none that I'm aware of.
Really?
This is all, nobody was talking about. When I did the KCSA conference on April 20th, there were a handful of us. The bankers tell me now that there's 100 different companies running around throwing the word magic mushroom or the word psychedelic on slide decks right now. So there are, the best analysts you're going to talk to are, doctors and scientists like Adam here who truly understand it, but it hasn't really, from my vantage point, gotten into the finance business yet with any experts really writing up on companies.
Okay. Thank you. There's just a couple more questions. And this kind of relates to international. How are these compounds used differently in different countries? What are some of the challenges in promoting these compounds in countries such as Japan, China, Korea? What role does cultural differences play in treatment conditions?
I'm not really familiar with what's going on in Asia, Adam. Are you?
No, I think that I haven't seen a lot of activity yet. There's a lot of cultural baggage with these treatments, for good or, usually for bad. I expect that that will all change, but right now, we're all, as a global society, trying to do the careful, rigorous research we need to convince regulatory agencies that this is real medicine. And I think that slowly but surely countries are coming on board with that.
Thank you. Can you share any feedback, if any, you are receiving from the health insurance industry around psychedelic treatment therapies?
Well, we're not there yet. Would have to believe that organizations such as Compass has already been communicating with the payers. But I would say that these ailments that we've been talking about, these maladies such as anxiety, depression, substance abuse, they take it's not just that this is a $15 billion a year market for antidepressants. The economic burden on just the United States on an annual basis is about $250 billion from lost productivity due to substance abuse and due to depression, anxiety. So I would have to believe the payers would extraordinarily back this because it's really a low-cost way of supporting a patient, no matter what this therapy costs, of avoiding that lost economic impact that is part of our society.
Adam, since you have been looking at some of the questions, because I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing the last one. I don't know if you see it.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, the question is, what do you think
Ayahuasca.
about ayahuasca? Ayahuasca is a very, very powerful psychedelic. There is not a ton of clinical research on it yet, but it's like all of these, very interesting. The anecdotal, or the field itself has built a large body of experience with it as a compound. It again has to be done under well-controlled conditions. There's lots of risk factors. It's not talk about not subtle. That is not subtle. And but I do not doubt that we'll start seeing more carefully well-controlled studies of it. They're already in the literature, and there'll be more. I think it's very interesting.
Adam,
I've heard that it actually gets you sick, like that there is a negative experience physically to using ayahuasca.
Yeah, it depends on how, it's usually a combination of different, ayahuasca is really a combination of different vines and leaves, and it's to allow the ingestion and then the absorption. And so there could be a lot of different side effects. So I imagine that we'll be seeing that reformulated in different types of ways to make it more administrable in clinical settings, but all that's open-ended.
Adam, if someone's terminally ill and they're going through end of life, is there a way for them to, work with these drugs today in order to hopefully kind of ease the stress of the?
I mean, it hasn't been approved for that, but because end of life care is so intense, and there are so many exceptions built around it, that there may be compassionate care uses. I'm not an expert in this, so I don't know for sure, but anyone that knows someone interested in this should be asking those questions, because compassionate use is possible for many things that are not approved otherwise when you are in such a tragic situation like we're talking about.
And also, Adam, if somebody wanted to give to your lab, how would they do that? And
yeah, if anyone, so unlike, what Evan's talking about, we're not taking financial investments. So there's no ROI in terms of money back, but I know many people are interested in philanthropy. That's where we do what we do. We do have many government grants, but most of the really innovative stuff that I do is built on philanthropy. And so there's lots of opportunities for anyone that wants to contribute. Gifts, we're 501c3, so we're, tax deducted philanthropic gifts. Please reach out to me. And we could talk about how you could be involved. We just brought on 4 more philanthropists that allowed us to launch our center this year, some in the US, some in the UK. It's a really active area of philanthropy because I think people are really frustrated by the lack of innovation in mental health, and many people have been impacted by it personally. And so I think people see 2 sides. They see an opportunity for business and financial return, which is great. And they see the opportunity, if they have resources, to put their money in something that could really change the world. So anyone that is interested in philanthropy, we would love to have you support our work. We're very, very hands-on with our philanthropists. It's not like you give it, you don't know where it's going. We're scrappy. We use every penny, and we let you know everything we do all the time. So please just reach out to me, and Steve and Callie could connect you.
Evan, any thoughts on your IPO? And how, if people want to get involved?
If they'd like to get involved, I'll work through you, Steve. So I could get information. I could get our deck out and any documentation.
Okay.
And I'm looking forward to participating in Adam's society.
There you go. Good. Okay. Great. So thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it. You guys are incredibly engaging, and you're doing great work for society and humanity. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.